Well, hey there, this is Dr. Scott Langford. I am so thrilled to welcome you to one of the last events in our amazing Black History Month at Foothill College this year, 2021, despite COVID, despite the pandemic, despite the lockdown, despite everything, we've kept the Heritage Months alive. And that is something that I'm fiercely proud of. And we have the advantage of having them recorded. So do be aware that we are recording this session, and we'll be sharing it widely as we go along. I'm going to, the agenda today is I'm gonna spend about 10 to 15 minutes as quickly as I can summarizing what I'm calling the lost history of Black education at Foothill College. And I'm telling you a little bit of a story about that. And then we have a number of guests, emeritus faculty members, emeritus staff members, and others who will hopefully be joining us to fill in much more of this story. One of the reasons I wanted to have this talk was precisely to help fill in more blanks and to help in a long-term project of trying to make this history more visible for all of us. So having said that, I'm going to go ahead and dive into my presentation. And then there, of course, will be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Also plenty of time, especially for those of you who are joining us from the community and who often know much more about this than I do. I'm going to start by saying that this starts out as kind of a ghost story, a haunting. This is how it all happened with me. So I'm going to tell you it from the Scott Langford perspective as an English professor at Foothill College now for 31 years. Just a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, on Friday, January 17th, 2020, I found myself sitting in the audience of Smithwick Auditorium, listening to the brilliant Dr. Cornell West. The auditorium was completely packed. And I began telling our president, Twee, and our chancellor, Judy, and anyone else who would listen, that James Baldwin had stood at exactly that same lectern on exactly that stage. And I got the kind of looks that I often get, that maybe Scott's getting a little bit on in years and doesn't actually remember what he's talking about. And sometimes that's true, by the way, but in this particular case, I contacted our wonderful Foothill Anza archivist, Marty Kahn, and he started showing me photographs and digitized versions of our Foothill Sentinel, which was the Foothill newspaper until the mid to late 90s, and it was shut down tragically. But there, in fact, is living proof that James Baldwin was on the Foothill campus, and this was the Foothill Sentinel for Friday, April 18th, 1969. And there he is indeed standing behind that exact lectern, right? But that was wonderful. By the way, we need a whole hour just to read what Baldwin said. I'll just read you the very first quote that comes off here by Sue Giller, the student city editor for the Sentinel. She did an excellent job. Baldwin said, "If I've lived among you for 400 years, somehow raising my children, somehow living my life, and you still ask me at this late date what the Negro wants, what makes you think you are in any way equipped to deal with this complex globe?" And it just goes on from there. It is a wonderful, amazing, timely, poignant speech that seems just as relevant to 2021. But the story of the haunting goes down here. So my eye falls down here, and I see this African-American woman, and it says, sitting next to Mary Hoover, Baldwin raps in the classroom. And I'm thinking, my God, that's L24, which is now our division office, or was until recently when we had a division office. And I'm thinking, who is Mary Hoover? And I'm starting to remember that maybe a couple of people, when I was first hired in 1989, had mentioned to me that we had an African-American female professor some years before who had left the faculty, but I can't remember. And so I started asking Marty for more information, like, who is Mary Hoover? And Marty, in his amazing way, starts sending me like, so here's the Facebook. Indeed, there was a professor of English named Mary Rhodes Hoover, and this is the Foothill faculty Facebook. That's really what it was called back then in 1969. So if you want to know where Facebook got its name, it's because back in the old days, this was the only way we could figure out who was who at our own college. So there's Mary Hoover, and we see some other familiar names, by the way, if you've been around long as I have. but I have no idea who this is. And then I say, Marty, I remember something about she was listed as a reading instructor, but wasn't treated as a full professor. And Marty says, yeah, I found the Foothill Language Arts Directory for 1969. And if your eye will follow down with me here, past all these names from years gone by that many of us will recognize. I have something to say about John Lovas in a minute, by the way, something very wonderful. Here indeed is Mary R. Hoover, listed as reading instructor and tutorial coordinator, her office being L28, and that was before we renumbered and renumbered all the campus and gave all the buildings a completely different name. And it is important in the story that what I remembered about Mary Hoover only vaguely was that people had told me that she had left the faculty. I got some idea that she didn't feel that she was treated with full respect. And again, this is all hazy memories from literally 30 years ago. Second and eighth hand, I never met Dr. Hoover, which is really tragic, and never made the effort to reach out to her, which I could have done. So I feel that she's been grabbing me by the collar at 3 o'clock in the morning and saying, hey, you, Scott Langford, I have a PhD in Stanford and so do you. I was a professor at Foothill College in English and you are now, you need to know who I am. And I've honestly felt like she's shaken me by the collar on many a morning. So I started doing some research on my own and I found that she had passed away in 2005 and had an obituary in the Washington Post, one of the major newspapers in the United States. And I was completely gobsmacked and humbled to read this note. Dr. Hoover was nationally recognized as one of the leading experts in literacy and teaching culturally diverse students to read. The recipient of a PhD from Stanford University in language and education. She was the author of Superliteracy, ended her career as chair of, well, let me go to the next slide because I sort of summarized this for you. So she got her BA in English in 1956, her master's in linguistics and elementary education at Stanford, which is those were the credentials that she had when she was a professor at Foothill College. She went on after leaving Foothill College to earn her PhD in linguistics. She was a professor of English, in my view, and tutorial center director at Foothill in circa 1968-69. I've never quite figured out when she started in the faculty. She was a co-founder and chair of communications at Nairobi Junior College, about which we can speak more later in the presentation. She became chair and founder of Black Studies program at CSU Long Beach, professor of Black Studies at SFSU, and as I mentioned, ended her career as Dean of Education at Howard University. So this is one of the major educators of the 20th century in the United States, and I didn't know who she was. And that's one reason I'm here today, is that I think it's time. I feel a little bit ashamed of myself that I didn't do this research before, but I've also inspired by her story. I dug into the Stanford Library and I found her dissertation, and here it is. This was Dr. Hoover's Stanford dissertation, 1975, appropriate use of Black English by Black children as rated by parents. If you're old enough, you'll recognize that that was typed because it was well before word processors. And here's the abstract, and I did type up the first sentence for us here. So her PhD was on the short-range purposes of the short-range purposes of this study were to determine parental attitudes about the appropriateness of two varieties of Black English for their children in 3 contexts: classroom, neighborhood, and home, and in 4 language arts areas: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And she was a leader in what was sometimes and still is referred to as Ebonics or Black English as an educational strategy, deserving full respect and stature. She was also part of a much wider movement. So this is where I'm going to pivot slightly. In my efforts to figure out who she was and what she had accomplished, I magically, and thank goodness, stumbled across this amazing article by a current professor named Jason Ferrara at San Francisco State University. And he wrote an article in, I think, 2014 called "From College Readiness to Ready for Revolution: Third World Student Activism at Northern California Community Colleges, 1965 to 1969. And this, once again, completely made my neck snap around. I could not believe it when I read this article, because what it argues is as follows. By the way, it focuses on College of San Mateo, our dear neighbor, CSM, where Dr. Hoover's spouse at that time, Dr. Robert Hoover, was also director of Tutorial Center and a major leader in the multicultural education movement at the time. But Dr. Ferrara's argument, and I did invite him, by the way, originally I had conceived of this as a talk by Dr. Ferrara with me just introducing him. He was unfortunately not available, so you're stuck with me. But to quote Dr. Ferrara, the history of the creation of academic ethnic studies departments often focuses on the relationships between popular social movements and activists on the campuses of research universities. This history often neglects the emergence of ethnic studies programs at community colleges serving working class students. And what this article, which is long, I think it took me at least an hour to get through it, but I was so fascinated because what it demonstrates is that Northern California community colleges, particularly colleges like CSM, Foothill, Anza, were at the forefront of a national movement in Black education that was getting Time magazine national journalistic coverage and was setting the pace for the whole United States. So just as Merritt College in the East Bay was the actual birthplace of the Black Panthers in many ways, and many of the Black Panther founders were community college students, so too the ethnic studies departments that now exist in the United States had their birth at least partially and crucially in the community college system at places like CSM. And Anza, which started its ethnic studies program in 1969, and Foothill, which went a slightly different way, but we'll talk about that as we move along. So I mentioned that Dr. Robert Hoover was at the College of San Mateo. I'm not sure Bob Hoover is still alive. I'm a little embarrassed that I wasn't able to contact him quickly enough. It didn't occur to me to search under Bob Hoover. So just yesterday, I started stumbling across local articles about him, and if he's still alive, at least until recently, this was a 2016 article, he was still mentoring and teaching students in East Palo Alto. He and Mary Hoover were long since divorced, and I don't know whether they were in communication or not, but this is a Foothill student. This is another Foothill article in which Dr. Robert Hoover comes to Foothill College to talk about the founding of the multicultural program at CSM and to do some comparison. And as you see, there's yet another photograph of our former Foothill College English department colleague, Mary Hoover, in this particular article. I'm getting closer to the end of my presentation. I don't want to take up too much time, but like I say, I found and stumbled across so much information. I wanted to make sure to share it as succinctly as I could. Now, in the pages that, broadening the focus a little bit again, in the pages that Marty Kahn gave to me that were digitized from the Foothill Sentinel, these are the exact same pages in which Baldwin's visit was covered. So when James Baldwin, world famous African-American intellectual, author, and activist, was covered as giving his speech at Smithwick Theater, I see that this was also the year that the Black Student Union was founded. And if you go down to 1, 2, third paragraph, the Black Student Union seeks to foster a total commitment to the local Black communities through unity and communication. So the Black Student Union was founded the same year, and Dr. Hoover was clearly part of that. Our theater department, which was quite famous across the Bay Area at the time, and now even more then, because there wasn't an internet and there wasn't as much competition. So the American Conservatory Theater was coming down from San Francisco, focusing on Black theater performances at Foothill College. And these are all from the same pages in the same issue, basically, of 1969, April 18th. Here's an article about the new curriculum that Foothill added. Note that Foothill did not create, quote unquote, an ethnic studies department, but we did add an African-American literature course, a Guidance 51 course to talk about identity. John Lovas, who was a colleague that I got to know very, very well, was launching a course also, and in Chicano studies, and so there was all kinds of things going on there. We can come back and talk about those things. Lovas was also leading the charge against, this might sound a little too familiar in 2021, there were massive student protests at Stanford and San Francisco State, famously and notoriously in the same time. And Professor Lovas, who was at Foothill at this time, moved to Anza also, along with a number of other professors. Interestingly enough, Professor Lovas was taking a stand against these blue buttons, which he saw as representing representing hostility, as a kind of dog whistle hostility to students of color on the campus. And he is then, these are retorts to his position here. Again, John Lovas is someone that I learned to really admire and respect, and I would like to include as on my list of many mentors at Foothill College when I arrived. So that's yet another person. And then, I certainly want to talk about Jean Thomas, who joined our multicultural staff in 1969. We now have a Jean Thomas Tutorial Center, finally, after, I think, 15 years of effort. And Jean was, again, someone that I got to know very, very well, that mentored me, that inspired me, and that reaches back to this whole era that I'm about to invite people like Don Dorsey to speak to. But here's what I want to end with. I want to end myself, and I don't know, I think that, for example, we're creating an ethnic studies program at Foothill right now. I don't mean that this is the only thing to do or even the most important thing, but it really does irk me. I do think that this part of our history has been often erased. Down here at the bottom, oops, I'm sorry, I got to back up here. So let me do that. So down here at the, in the last bullet point, I mentioned when I looked, and this is a very informal survey, I could not find one other college or university in the Bay Area that didn't have at least one building named for a person of color. And Foothill doesn't. And it really, unless I'm forgetting something, like Foothill colleagues, please remind me. But I find this really galling, and I think it is a kind of institutional amnesia. We have a Smithwick Theater, and Smithwick, who I met, was on the board of trustees for many years, and we named our theater after him. That's the theater that Baldwin and more recently Dr. West were giving their speech in. But why isn't there a Mary Zoglin building? This is that same article about Baldwin being here. Here's that photograph of Mary Hoover. Here is Mary Lou Zoglin, who was the female member of the Board of Trustees, who was also a statewide leader in the community college system. And I'm kind of wondering why we don't have a Zoglin building also, with all due respect to Mr. Smithwick, who was a wonderful person. We have a Hugh Siemens Library. He was president of Foothill College when Mary Hoover was a faculty member here. And by the way, the students staged to sit in his office, notoriously. There were more than 1,000 students on a regular basis out in what we now call Hyde Park Square, which is where it's authorized to have protests and activities, free speech activities. But I really want to know why there's no Mary Hoover building, and I would like to propose that there should be one. We do have a Krauss Center for Innovation, so at least we have one. At least we have one building named for a female. But why not have a James Baldwin building? So that's just my very personal take on this whole thing. And again, I don't want to sort of make too much out of what we name our buildings. I think much more concrete activities and budgets and curriculum and faculty and hiring are all more important than this. But I do want to say that I think it's time to restore the memory of this very distinguished American educator who was very much a part of our faculty at a completely crucial and pivotal time, and really changed Foothill College in profound and amazing ways. So with that, I am going to stop my share, at least for a moment. I'm going to invite my former colleague and now emeritus colleague, Don Dorsey, who was Dean of Students for many, many, many years, not quite back to 1969, as he will probably want to explain to you. But I'd like, if I may, Don, I'd like to invite you to sort of chime in. My vision for this event from this point forward is that community members, both faculty and staff now, and emeritus, and people from the general community would be able to raise their hand and contribute, correct Scott Langford as much as needed. I mean, remember, I got here in 1989, which is a heck of a long time ago, but Mary Hoover had been gone for 20 years prior to that. So I'm really reaching back far, far beyond my own experience and just kind of doing the best I can. So I don't mind being corrected. I just want to know more about this. I want to know more about this era and more about Mary Hoover in particular, but I want to know more about our whole multicultural program. So Dawn, do you want to take it from here for a while and please share? And thank you, Dawn, for rejoining us at Foothill College, one of my favorite colleagues ever. I keep teasing him that he looks younger and younger every time I see him since he's retired, but that doesn't mean I don't miss you like crazy. So I do. But take it away, Don. Let's see what you want to contribute at this point.
I guess thank you, Scott, and hello, everybody. It's good to be a part of this discussion. Foothill is a very important space in my life, or has a very important space. I spent many, many years at Foothill. I actually grew up there. I was hired at Foothill in 1972. I was a graduate student at San Jose State. And actually, I had the responsibility of working with students in mathematics who wanted and needed to become tutors in the newly forming multicultural program. Scott, were you able to reduce those Sentinel articles I sent to viewable sizes?
You know, I got them so late. You go ahead and keep talking, Don, and let me check and see how far I got along. I did download them just before the presentation started, but I haven't actually opened them. So keep talking for a second and I'll give you an update.
Okay, well, my sense of Foothill history and its response in the 60s and 70s to the times stems from the experiences that I had as a young man recently out of the military in Oakland. I thought it was sort of interesting. On your link for today's talk, there is a video focused on Merritt College and the Black Panther movement. Mm-hmm. I looked at that before joining this discussion, and to my surprise, I saw, do you remember William Harrelson, Scott?
Yeah.
Bill Harrelson, a treasured member of our faculty, Bill Harrelson, is featured in that video.
Oh, I didn't make that connection.
He was the founding chair of the African American Studies program at Merritt College. Now, what that says to me, it answers some questions that I had. Because when I was hired in '72, it was really in response to, or a part of the college district response to the Lovas Black, Brown, White report, mm-hmm. which talked and focused on ways that colleges could better respond to disadvantaged students and communities of color. The nation was in turmoil. There were demonstrations everywhere over the war in Vietnam and police brutality. And many of the college campuses became tinderboxes. Well, Foothill and Anza never really experienced the kind of violence and chaos that other colleges face. And I think that in large shares should be credited, to be a credit to the leadership of the district. They attempted to reach out and involve not only communities of color, but students of color, and have those reactions inform their responses. John Lovas's paper sort of lays out a framework of an approach. The way in which the two colleges responded to that paper is very different. I sent you, okay.
Yeah, so I am screen sharing now, Don, and you can tell me to click on any of the attachments that you sent. So that's number one right there.
The next one,
I will be your assistant over here, and you just tell me where to click.
Okay. The Anza response was to create an ethnic studies, well, both colleges created a multicultural program. The multicultural program was responsible for working with the community and students to develop paths that would allow students to be better educated by the colleges, and the colleges be in a better position to serve the communities. The Anza model had them hire Ed Kawazoy. There's a shot of him. Ed Kawazoy helped develop the multicultural program at Anza, while at the same time, they decided to create an ethnic studies division. That ethnic studies division was really one of the first ethnic studies divisions in the country at a community college.
Yeah, and I'll add, that's what Professor Ferrara makes absolutely clear as a scholar in the field, right? Like, these were not just leading community colleges, this is leading the whole nation.
Yes.
I know that I've known this my whole career about San Francisco State, proudly, that San Francisco State was one of the, they were the leader at the university level. I had no idea that community colleges were leading at this level, right?
Yes, that's the Anza model, but I was not really aware until today, Scott, of Bill Harrelson's role in the development of ethnic studies courses and the Foothill response.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you'll go to the Foothill
This
slide.
one here? Let's see. Is that the one you're after?
Yeah, I think so.
Whoops, sorry, went too far again.
It focuses on the creation of courses. Go further down.
Now, this is Bruce Franklin, who was the only tenured faculty member at Stanford ever to be fired, by the way, in the same, so here he is speaking at Foothill College, and he was fired for being an activist and accused of harboring terrorists or something like that. So is it here you are, Felix named his head, is that what we're looking for there?
Yeah, and go further down, there should be an article that focuses on the African American courses that have been,
wow, look at that,
agreed on, that the multicultural program will foster. It's not there.
Okay, and it may be in another article too, so we'll just kind of keep navigating here.
At any rate, what Foothill chose to do was develop a multicultural program that relied on certificated staff to work with faculty who were hired in each of the divisions to teach the ethnic studies courses. Now, that's a pretty significant investment and challenge to pull off if you're aware of how competitive it is to get FTEs, faculty FTEs at community colleges. anywhere. I was eventually selected as the Multicultural Associate Coordinator for African American Studies. Vicky Takeda had that responsibility for Vicky Takeda and Lilia Chung for Asian American Studies, and Ishmael Gonzalez for Chicano Studies.
Right. All of whom I was able to work with 20 years later too, right?
Yes.
So those are all names very familiar with me because I partnered with them when I first got here, and they were my mentors along with you. So
I included another.
Oh, and this was the article. This was the article that I had found on the same page as the Baldwin about the curriculum. So that's just to say, this does list, say, an Afro-American literature course, Spanish-American literature course, English 300, et cetera, et cetera. So that article that does cover some of the ways that Foothill institutionalized this curriculum. But am I correct that the idea at Foothill was not to create a separate division, but to try to spread responsibility and ownership of ethnic studies courses to integrate it into every single division?
Yes. Now that all occurred before I came.
Right.
So that is what I was told when I asked, well, why don't we have an ethnic studies department as the Anza does? And that was their reasoning. It was to have the divisions own the curriculum and have the faculty be able to participate in the division to modify and enrich the discussions about issues related to students of color and the people and the students they serve.
Right. And that's actually what it says in this article here. Like in this paragraph, it says many courses still have their same title, but are changing their emphasis, according to Harold Seeger, who was our legendary vice president of instruction back then. As examples, he pointed to American history courses, which will stress minority contributions. The political science courses dealing with early California will cover the Spanish influence in greater depth, and so on and so forth. And this was also what I was told when I arrived as well. And I'll add as a footnote, I had a conversation with one of the leaders of the efforts to make the CSU ethnic studies a requirement for all students in all transfers. And his complaint was that the Berkeley English department that he was familiar with had dodged their responsibility to teach African-American literature, Latin American literature, et cetera, by saying, oh, well, they do that over there in ethnic studies. So this wasn't necessarily a dysfunctional model in any way, shape, or form, if that makes sense. And now back to you, Don. Those are my footnotes for us here.
Well, let's see. The other Sentinel articles that I shared with you. Okay,
Do you see that list on the screen there, Don?
Oh, great.
Yeah, you just have to tell me which ones. So you got the entire list on the right side there. You should be able, I think you can tell me which ones you want me to click on.
Okay. Brown, number 6.
Number 6, okay. This is so exciting to read this stuff for me. It's like, wow. Woo!
Okay. The article that focuses on Brown era's views.
Got it.
Is very important because of Foothill's position in the state, in leadership of California community colleges development. When Willie Brown came down to talk about additional funding and other issues, I think it's important to note that in his comments, he talked about the way in which students of color were or were not being served, what the colleges needed to do in terms of responding to and better serving communities of color.
And I'll note for younger students that Willie Brown was one of the most important politicians in California, full stop, period, in the 20th century. and even into the 21st. So like this man had a legendary career, ending his career as the mayor of San Francisco, but really having run the state legislature for many years. So one of the truly great legendary politicians in California.
Now on that same page, Scott, if you'll shift and go further down, you'll see an article that focuses on Charles Moreland.
Okay, I want to say that's that lectern too. I just want people to know who has stood behind that lectern, right?
You know, it's interesting, Scott. There have been so many people behind Alex Haley.
Yeah.
Nikki Giovanni.
Yeah.
Okay, this guy, Charles Moreland,
okay,
was the person who was responsible for development of the African American component of the multicultural program. So he was there until 72. But this guy, Charles Moreland, after leaving Foothill, moved to Chicago and eventually became editor of Muhammad Speaks. Are you familiar with Muhammad Speaks?
I am, but you better remind the students and those who may not be.
Muhammad Speaks is the national publication for the Nation of Islam.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the 2 or 3 most important publications in the United States for the African American community at that time. So, wow.
So these were the people who were thinking about better ways to make the college work. And it was in this environment, Gene Thomas, Charles Moreland, John Bostic, Bill Harrelson, Otis Banks, they laid the groundwork. And when I was hired in 73, go to the 8th slot.
Okay.
Ethnic Studies integrated.
John Day, I
It was
remember
my
him.
responsibility to work with the divisions to continue to develop coursework and/or help find faculty for the division and to oversee the responsibilities for continuing to grow the instructional arm. Well, as you can see, there was a challenge to the degree to which those courses were not being offered. They were often soft pedaled and/or just simply removed.
Yep.
If you look back to the number of courses that existed at the college in 1973, in each of the divisions, it pales by what's available right now. I'm sure the demand hasn't changed. The need certainly hasn't changed.
Right.
So I wonder if it's priority.
Well, that's one reason I think we need to have this conversation in 2021 as we revamp and move towards the ethnic studies model that Anza had chosen these many years ago. And it's one reason that and again, I don't know that I have an answer, but I do think it's important to remember this history. And I also just think it is stunning to think of who stood on that stage, but even, who was in the faculty. Just incredible nationwide leaders. The articles that I was looking at also talked about John Vasconcelos, one of the first Chicanx legislative leaders in California, and a legendary, he was still a leader in the assembly when I came onto the faculty. And again, Anza has a Vasconcelos Center, right? They have named a building and an entire program after John Vasconcelos, right? And rightly so. And I don't feel that Foothill has honored its history or even knows its history in the same way. And I think that kind of institutional amnesia becomes disempowering. I don't think we have to say, oh, we've tried everything, you can't do anything now. It's more like standing on the shoulders of giants and honoring the ancestors exactly as we did when pouring libations at the beginning of Black History Month, right? Like, this is why we have Black History Month. And I think the institution will be stronger if we honor the strength of what was accomplished before.
On that note, though, Scott, I don't know if you're aware, but in 2008, a multi-ethnic coalition, including the Counseling Division, passed the Torch Asian Pacific Islander, Asian Pacific American Network, the African American Network, Ola, Puente, Mfumo, ASFC, Student Activities and Student Affairs, presented a resolution to name the new Student Services Building for Jean Thomas.
Oh no, I am very aware. I was on sabbatical that year, so I wasn't present, but I was emailing up a storm, and I do know that. And then we were turned down, and then only, I guess it's 2 years ago now, Natalie Menendez and others finally succeeded in getting the tutorial center portion of the library named for Jean Thomas, but that was after 12 years of effort.
But really, you do have at Anza, the campus center is called the Henson Center. And that center is named for Marge Henson, who was the Dean of Students in Anza's early days. The administration's response to our resolution and request was that board policy needed to be revised to have this request honored. I'm not sure where the resolution sits at this point, but I'd be happy to email it out to all who are listening in case there's interest in understanding the premise, the basis upon which all of these people felt that the college would be honored by having her name.
Well, and we would. I completely agree. And yes, so let's follow up on this as well. I want to make sure you have time to talk about any of these other articles here, Don.
Okay. I'm gonna go down to number 10 rather.
Oh yeah, I'm so glad you put the griot in there.
The griot was the African American network's way of holding on to history. And if you go back through the archives prior to the griot, there was a much less sophisticated newsletter that was called Shades of Black, that sort of traced the annual report out to students and community as to what the issues were facing continued development and progress for better service to the community. But I included this griot because I wanted you to see students. Keep moving, Scott.
Okay, I'm going.
The number of the staff.
Yeah, the number of staff,
faculty and staff.
American staff and administrators.
Yes.
And yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Rose Myers, who we lost and moved on to San Francisco State successfully. So many. Look at that. There was our Martin Luther King celebration that year. Okay, Don.
Okay, shift it down to, there's a page where all the photographs show.
Okay.
And that will.
On the griot or
on the griot.
So just
probably page 6.
Okay, I'll scroll a little bit faster.
Yes.
This is an extensive publication. That's one of the things that I find. So I remember these students so well too. Great, 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 great students. All right, that was page 6. Is that the one you're looking for, or is that?
Further down, further down.
Keep going, keep
There
going.
should be,
Brother to Brother, which you co-founded. That
it
was
should be further. It should be others. Okay. At any rate, you can, at your leisure, go back and look to see the number of staff persons hired by the college in those days. Then if you go to the last griot, I'm not sure if you have it.
Yeah, let's see.
It
Just kind of scrolling at this point.
okay. No, it would be another.
Yeah, it looks like, so I think this is the 10th attachment, so it might be that you'll just have to
It
send
would
us
be the
more.
11th. It would be the 11th. But at any rate, the point of that was to show, as a result of budget cutbacks.
Here it is, Don. I found it. Let's see if it'll open for us. I might have to go over here to PDFs. Oh, keep talking.
As a result of budget challenges, many positions were lost and people were lost as a consequence. And the community, the campus community, suffered the most because of it.
And you know, one of my bugaboos is that Rose Myers here, our well, I thought brilliant vice president of instruction at that time, 2 years later in 2010 came forward with what I thought was a visionary plan for Foothill to take the next step, very much the equity, very much like and in the spirit of Equity 2.0, and that was more or less didn't gain traction, I guess is the way I might want to say it that way. So I was disappointed at that point in that situation. Now, let's see.
Let me just make one more statement, and this is for the students. One of the challenges that you're going to face as you build a life and establish a career is being persistent, being able to look beyond the challenges that you currently face. I'm not sure if you've read Begin Again by Eddie Galt Jr. He focuses on James Baldwin's written word. And in that publication, he reminds readers that our history has shown us what it's like to live in the after times. And he points to 3 critical after times in American history. There was the period immediately following Reconstruction, when Dixiecrats and all others decimated all progress that had been made to ensure people's enfranchisement and just possibilities in this country. There was the after time of the civil rights era, when Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy were all assassinated, and people were just decimated. Those were the after times. But people during those times persevered.
Right.
And he points out that we are now in another after time. The 4 years of Donald Trump and all that that meant. We're in the after times. So I would encourage you to remain vigilant, do your work, and be persistent. This is not new.
No, it's
With
not.
that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you so much, Don. Now, I've been so focused. I've been focused on Mr. Dorsey so completely that I don't even know who might. So I see Kofi, my colleague, is asking to be unmuted. So let's go ahead and unmute Professor Beju. And there, I think you're unmuted now, Kofi. If you would like to go, if you'd like
Yes.
to, great. And if anybody else is here, I want to kind of prioritize members of the community as much as I can. And I haven't even had time to scroll through, but we were doing some a little bit embarrassingly last minute outreach. So I want to try to get any special guests or people who do have knowledge in here. But of course, I want to hear from students, and of course, we want to hear from current faculty, staff members as well. But Kofi, if you could speak next, I think that would be great, because you and I had already been emailing back and forth about these topics.
I just want to piggyback on what Don Dorsey said about persistence with a story of my own. First of all, I consider Don a mentor because I was in student government and the Black Student Union 87 to 90 when he was running student activities. And you know, I probably talked to him almost as much as my own parents during that period. And so I consider him a great mentor. And you know, when he talks about persistence, that really speaks a lot to me, because after I left Foothill, after getting my associate degree and studying at Dillard University and getting a bachelor's there, I went to San Jose State and eventually became the Black Student Union co-president. And the main thing we fought for was ethnic studies requirement. And you know, I was president twice, and we got absolutely nowhere. Well, I wouldn't say nowhere, but we did. I did join the academic senate as a student representative, and we made our case, but we did not actually get them to approve ethnic studies requirement. And then fast forward to today, I'm a professor at Foothill in computer science, and up pops the Foothill students organized under the name CORE, demanding in this post George Floyd era, if you will, this BLM era, that we have ethnic studies requirement here at Foothill. And what do they cite as one of the rationales is that the CSU system now has ethnic studies requirement, the whole system. And that was the first time I had learned that we had actually won the fight to have ethnic studies requirement at San Jose State. So, you know, if you put in the time, plant those seeds, they may grow a tree that you don't even know about later on. And you may never know about, but the seed has been planted. Make sure you do that work, as Don was saying. And about Mary Hoover, turns out both my parents taught at the Anza College. In fact, my father was a tenured math professor. He's now retired. But before that, he actually helped Mary Hoover with her dissertation. She actually paid him to do some work, some statistical work on her dissertation. And he and my mother remember her well. I looked into her with them after hearing that Scott was looking into that. And, you know, so just a little history of mine on that respect as well.
Great. Okay, and then Kofi, do you want to say anything more? I think the chat is now open. We are monitoring it. And I do want to give a shout out. We have 6 students who have volunteered. There have been tragically some Zoom bombings during our Black History Month, so the chat's being monitored very, very carefully. But we are opening it up, and I think if you want to raise your hand, we can also call on you. I kind of quickly scrolled through. There's so many people I would like to hear from, including some of my current colleagues like Natalie Menendez. Anybody else that would like to raise their hand, we'll just do the best we can. And of course, we're already pushing past the hour that this that this session was set for, but I can certainly linger as long as anyone wants to talk about this. It has been keeping me awake at night, and I'm eager to gather as much information as I can so that we can take even more steps to try to make this history visible in all kinds of ways. So let's see.
Natalia.
Talia.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for this event. And I'm sorry I got in a little bit late due to a link that wasn't working, but I don't know if Don Dorsey has been acknowledged for all of the just insanely kind of visionary leadership, insane and visionary leadership that he provided. He mentored me from the beginning. I was just all over the place coming in from Berkeley, and he really helped me to refine my skills and hold my tongue and breathe and also speak my truth, just kind of balance all that out. And, Scott, you've been an extraordinary colleague as well. And, Melanie Hale, like there's just so many greats. It's just very overwhelming emotionally in such a beautiful and powerful way. And there's so many people to name, but Don, I still have the picture from your retirement, that little button that went around when you had the big, beautiful afro, and I still have that in my office. And you remember I paid tribute to you at your going away event, but it was so powerful. So there's just been so many extraordinary people, and hopefully, yeah, and that's it. I just wanted to say thank you and pretty much just honor you.
Thank you,
Natalia. I just want to make sure for students who may not know you yet, Natalie Menendez is my colleague in the English department, and delighted to have you here. And Natalia, we did give some props to Don, and but I'm so glad you gave more. And you were correcting me in the chat, and I want to make sure that we say it out loud that Paul Starr and Valerie Fong, who's here today, and many others led the effort, which it really extended over more than a decade, resulting in dedication of the tutorial center to Gene Worth. So I think you are part of that group, but I appreciate you sharing so generously, as you always do, that the leadership was very widespread. And that's the whole point, is that, like, it takes a college. It is the mutual responsibility. In fact, there's a story about John Lovas. I read the Black and Brown report from 1969 because Roberto Cias sent it to me. And one of the main lines in there is that John Lovas and the co-author, whose name is escaping me right now at the Anza, were frequently approached on campus and asked, "How are you doing with your report?" And their immediate retort was always, "It is not our report. It is everyone's report. It is everyone's responsibility. It is everyone's obligation as an educator." And so that's a discussion that goes way back as well. Who else have we got for hands up? And I can always use help from my colleagues here, because my screen is.
There's another question posted in the chat.
Okay, question posted in the chat. I see Lily's, and I may not, I'm seeing the most recent question, so I'm gonna take Lily's question. How is the concept of including multicultural studies in already existing classes enforced instead of creating an ethnic studies program? And Lily, by the way, this was partly Don already mentioned, and I'll let Don answer the question. It was a point of contention, and is still, I think, a point of contention. So I don't think that discussion is history. But Don, do you want to go ahead and speak to that?
The question of
how is the concept, let me reread it for you. How is the concept of including multicultural studies in already existing classes enforced instead of creating an ethnic studies program? And I guess my short answer was it wasn't.
Right.
And that was the fatal flaw.
And even worse than that, just to be honest, there were specific courses that were transferable, easily transferable, English Lit, African American Histories A and B, Political Science 7. I'm speaking about the African American courses, of course, but I think the same could be said for the Chicano and the Asian courses as well. It's sort of benign neglect. If there isn't a force to pressure in a certain direction, if there isn't a buy-in of the vision, then people will retreat to their corners. I mean, that's what history has shown us. And I think the Foothill model anticipated broader campus support within divisions.
Exactly.
And I don't think that happened.
Well, and as you know, so many times we would hit the next funding crisis, which is always around the corner. And so, when Victoria, Takeda, and I and Niall were heading up the Cultural Diversity Center and getting lots of attention and filling Smithwick Theater with all kinds of amazing programs. And we hit in this case a self-inflicted financial crisis at FHDA, which did result in the resignation of the chancellor, but also resulted in the end of the multicultural program, of that version, the Cultural Diversity Center. We lost our reassigned time, et cetera, et cetera. So it was kind of back to square one. And then we're still at it, but there has been a sort of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back history at the college that needs to be acknowledged as far as I'm concerned.
I think it's really fundamental that the college make a commitment in terms of its primary responsibility, that one of them is cultural diversity, that the instructional component of that is vital to the community.
Yeah, I'll mention, I know I bang on about that lectern, but among the many things I like about that lectern that we still have, which is sort of deeply part of Foothill history, behind which so many great names have stood, it also has the original Foothill seal on it. And I do like our current mission statement, but I have to say that maybe this is just me being old. I love the statement, the motto that is on that seal, that is on that lectern.
Absolutely.
Educational excellence for all. And as far as I'm concerned as a Foothill faculty member, that's all the mission statement I have ever needed or will ever need, 4 words long. There it is. I see another question from one of my students, which I'm happy to direct to Don. Good question, Charles. Charles asks, you mentioned that Foothill College can do more to acknowledge its history and contribution to Black education. But how can we ensure that these acknowledgements lead to a positive change instead of just being a form of tokenism?
I think Foothill really has done a pretty good job in terms of honoring diversity. You look at the campus life programs and how integral they are to what goes on in the classroom. People underestimate the power of the ceremonies and programs that are associated with the opening of school, the welcome to campus, the greetings, the importance of students connecting with other students, to welcome them, to be peer mentors for them. And then the campus life staff working with faculty and staff in the development of it's almost a year-long diversity program, which gives the chance to all in the community to look at specific issues in the broader society that are having impacts on students and families. And then all of the different ways that the community can come together to celebrate success, and sometimes, unfortunately, to mourn loss. But I think what occurs within the campus community is extremely important. And also with the ability of social media, the record of what is occurring and the history of that is much more easily documented and preserved. I know, for example, I'm working with a couple other folks on an extension of the African American Network's history so that it's preserved on the website.
Yeah, good. And I think one of the things that we need to discuss is further ways to make this history visible in many ways. And Don, since you mentioned it, I wanted to screen share just one more quick time here. And thank you for those of you that are still lingering. I realize that we're way over time. So like I say, this is one of my passion projects. And so I'm gonna stay as long as anybody wants to talk. But I really appreciate that we had a full house and that so many of my former and current colleagues came, my students here that I recognize, including Charles, who just asked that very excellent question. But to do a quick screen share, I did want to show you again in this particular photograph. I think I can share this correctly. So this is the photograph here's Jimmy Baldwin standing behind that lectern. Here's the photograph that got me started in this quest to figure out who was Mary Hoover. But another thing that absolutely amazed me in this photograph was that there was, and this was fundamentally part of the multicultural program from the beginning, explicitly both Mary Hoover and her then spouse, Bob Hoover, it was explicitly in partnership with Chicano students and faculty and staff, specifically in partnership with Asian and Asian American faculty and staff. It was explicitly a multicultural program. Yes, Black education was at the center of it and should be and still is, I hope. But I was really impressed looking at that photograph at the diversity of the program and the student body then as well as now. And our numbers are higher. I think somewhere in one of these articles, Mary Hoover mentions that only 2% of the student body was African American in 1969. But at the same time, I was inspired when I first came here by the inclusiveness of the vision. And I do think it was integral to being a community college, right? Like that being a community in just exactly the ways you just expressed, Don, have been part of it from the beginning. And I will mention, by the way, Don, in terms of praising Don Dorsey, you were the one that built out the history and heritage months, right? From the initial beachhead of Black History Month, and now we have this full calendar, but that was really under your leadership and one of your many legacies. And I'm proud that we've kept it alive even in the middle of a quarantine and a pandemic. And let's see, who else would like to speak? I'm trying to scroll around and find anybody's hand that might be up, and my monitors can do the same if you want. Who else might I want to call on to make sure that I've got going? There's so many names that, I would love to mention. Andre, I'd love to hear your reactions, just because we haven't had as much chance to interact on the history part as what's been, what's going on now. Let's see, I don't necessarily want to call anybody out though. If we're at the end, we can also wrap things up. I'm going to check the chat one more time too. Make sure I'm not missing something. Okay, well, I think then, I guess when I'm not seeing hands up, at least I'm not seeing hands up. We are pretty far in. Everybody gets, we all get, we all get Zoom fatigue eventually, even in the most exciting presentations. Oh, Cynthia has raised her hand. By the way, Don, Cynthia, like Kofi, is a former student at Foothill College who is now a professor, a full-time professor of art history.
Oh,
And yes, wow. So, so yeah, let's hear from the new generation here. Cynthia, I think you're unmuted. If not, I'll ask the monitors to unmute you.
I'm unmuted. Thanks, Scott. I just want to thank you for this event. It's just been an amazing, it's amazing to get a sense of the history and all of the efforts. And I have to confess that part of me felt irritated that so many people have tried to make these changes for decades. And have not been able to be successful. So I guess my question, and I apologize if this has already been answered because I've been a little bit in and out fielding student emails. My question is, what do you all think about what's happening now with this new effort from the student demand, the student open letter asking for all of the things that it sounds like you have been working on for decades at Foothill. And yeah, there's part of me that really admires your grace in all of this. Cause like I said, I felt a little bit like, I don't know, if I'd been in the trenches for 30, 40 years, I'd be kind of irritated. So I'm wondering what you all who have seen this longer history, what your thoughts are about what's taking place now in terms of the student open letter and this effort to have an ethnic studies program. And also I'm on the African American Network. And so I would love to hear some vision of what you would like to see from us.
is that for me or?
Yeah, I think that's you, Don. I think you're on deck here.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think it's important for students. Let me just first say, I was so impressed by what I read,
Yeah.
but I was equally impressed by the video orientation that summarizes who CORE is and what their vision is. Every generation should have and be able to articulate a vision to those who serve them, how best to do that. And it was refreshing for me to hear that in the after times that we're currently going through. As James Baldwin said, we really are. So my encouragement would be to persist. Students, you have to be willing to put in the work. You have to be willing to negotiate, and you have to be able to find a solution. It may not be all that you want, but you build on successes. And with regard to the African American Network, I think it plays a critical role. At least it did when I was there in the campus community on a daily basis, in terms of grounding you, in terms of helping sustain you and help achieve personal as well as group goals. When I was there, we always felt we owed it to make opportunities more available and the campus more receptive and potentially successful for students of color in particular, African Americans specifically.
Yes, and I'm actually searching around. Oh, well, actually, before I say that, I'm searching for another article that I wanted to share that loops this question all the way back to the era of Mary Baldwin. Mary Hoover and James Baldwin. But I did see, Don, in the chat, first, first my colleague Andre, who says he's marinating in the wisdom of Baba Don, which I love, and Cheryl Lim asked the question, how can we make it so that, which very important question, how can we make it so that education on Black history is interesting to people who are not as informed or interested initially? That's Cheryl Lim, and to which Kofi answers, focus on movements and not just famous individuals, lessons learned and current opportunities, which I think is a very wise answer. But if you would like to add, I will continue looking for this article that I wanted to screen share here.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we all understand and really agree that American history is not complete. It's, as taught, generally inaccurate and certainly insensitive to truths as it relates to communities of color in this country and social movements. So the challenge for young, aspiring intellects is to research and learn your own truth and allow that to be the basis upon which you live.
Thank you so much for that. The article, I guess I'm not finding it, but that you've all seen enough screen shares in a way anyway. The article I wanted to mention was that there was an incident involving Hugh Siemens, who was the president of Foothill College at that time, and he sent out a memo in the heated moment that Don referred to, where there was all kinds of campus unrest. He sent out a memo to the faculty and staff saying, here are these emergency measures when violence strikes Foothill College. And the president of the Black Student Union at the time spoke to him and wrote to him and said that this is a false fear and you need to apologize for that memo. And by the way, to the credit of President Siemens, who thought of himself as a communicator, and I think rightly so, he did in fact apologize for the memo. So it's interesting again, Don, this legacy of keeping the lines of communication open is, I think, another positive feature of Foothill College. And the leadership, you know, when I came on board in 1989, one of the reasons I wanted to be here was that my gut sense was that Foothill was a leader nationwide in these efforts, and I wanted to be part of that. And I'm a little embarrassed that I'm still learning all these years later, but it's partly there was a lot to know. And so kind of an amazing legacy there. I see another question, so I'll read it. This is Andre's response to Ramona. Ramona says, what can I do? Then I'll read Ramona's question first. What can I do as a student to help the faculty effort to acknowledge Black history and contributions to Black education? Staff member Andre's answer is, great question. I would share, use your voice, be active on campus, in your community will help. Your voice is your greatest power to use actively. CORE is a solid support group of peers supporting and combining their powers to shift the culture. Yes, fantastic. And Don, if you want to add to that, that would be great.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think with the current reliance broadly on social media, young people are in particularly good spaces to have their voices be heard and affect social change. You are the future, and you can much more easily be heard than your predecessors. So you have a great opportunities. You have a great opportunity to affect change with I don't know, with less of a communication challenge than previous generations.
Yeah, there's amazing power in what we have now. And I just want to say to the students and my newer colleagues, all of you, some of you are here. I mean, I've been hanging around this place for 31 years, Don even longer, learning all the way back. You know, we're looking at a history that's 50, 60 years old now. And I honestly believe and have been saying this generation of students and this generation of new young faculty members are as good as anything we've ever had. And thank God for that, right? Like it has held me up in these last years. And I really mean it from the heart. And so, you know, all of me dragging us back and everyone else, like, I don't mean the history lesson to be, look, we were better than you were, or, you know, that 69 was 69 and it'll never be better. I want you to know that there were people there before you who were doing their damnedest, doing their best, and their best was very good. And that they are still, you are part of that heritage at this college. I want people who come to Foothill College to feel that they're part of something that has nationwide implications, because when I came, that was the ethos of Foothill College. And I want to continue.
I have to chime in. You know, I was very active statewide and nationwide as a member of the faculty and as an administrator and as a elected member of the board in my community. Foothill College, as I moved around, people would ask, what are you all doing about this? Foothill has always set the pace in terms of change. So I would encourage you to stay at the front of that curve and affect social change.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is that's where these people's, you know, our new crew, the hearts and minds are there. It's there, and it is fully up to the incredible standards that have already been set, and that's what Foothill College deserves. That is what Foothill College deserves. It is what we have always been. It's what we need to continue to be into the future. Andre's making me feel better about not knowing enough, which is fine. I'm pretty used to that by now, Andre. But it has been a continual journey. I learned from your social media. Speaking of who's good at social media, Andre, man, you are a master of social media. I love the stuff that you put up on your LinkedIn. I'm always there with you. All right, let's see. I'm looking to see if there's other hands, because I know we're way over time at this point. We're 90 minutes in, and people's heads will start to hit the keyboard if we're not careful. But I also want to say it's pretty amazing to have 20 people hanging in with us at this point for a history lesson. So, so that's great. Let's see if I see any more questions. Okay. Well, I think we should wrap up. I think, we're coming up on 90 minutes. That's usually when people really, even when you're fully engaged, your eyes begin to glaze. I do feel that we've hit some really beautiful points. I want to emphasize, especially to my current students and current colleagues, that I think it is our responsibility to find as many ways as we can to make this history visible, not only to ourselves, but to future colleagues. And Cynthia, I'm so glad that you were here so that you could hear some of this history, because I feel that we do a very poor job of letting you know who came before you, right, as a new professor. And I think it's essential that you do know. I think it's empowering and beautiful and inspiring. It's a little scary too. Like, yeah, there's been some hard times, but people like Don, people like Mary Hoover, like, you know, she left Foothill, I think, not very happy with the support that she had here. It's clear from some of the articles. but she just didn't fold up her tents and go home. She founded a completely new junior college, got her PhD at Stanford University, founded the Black Studies program at CSU Long Beach, and went on to head up the education department at Howard University. Like, okay, so she didn't exactly give up and go home, did she? She went big. And I think that's what we all need to keep doing, even in these dark after times in which we now live, and which we will outlive if we do our jobs.
Scott, I am going to forward you a copy of the resolution that was submitted regarding the naming of the Student Services Building for Jean Thomas. It in detail outlines her contributions to the college. Could you forward it to all who were here? Yeah.
Yes, I can. I can indeed, and I will do so. Oh, and Cheryl, the student, did say, this is really nice. This is almost another way to close in a way. Cheryl says, I meant to elaborate. I myself try to educate myself, additionally those around me. However, I find myself often met by resistance by my family members, which really shuts me down. I don't know how to confront the situation because I feel in order to fully support the movement, I have to start with those close to me. Boy, Cheryl, that's something that I certainly face in my family also at times. So Don, do you want to speak to that at all, or anybody else? It is in some ways the very hardest thing. Kofi says Jean Thomas was my counselor. Yeah. Kofi, I think Jean Thomas was my counselor too.
Scott, she was everyone's counselor.
She was everyone's
counselor. You would meet her, and if she looked you in the eye, you knew things were fine. If she dropped her head.
Oh. Oh.
Yeah.
I so very much agree with that. And boy, talk about persistence. She was the ultimate lesson in persistence and courage all of those years. Okay, I think I'm going to be the one to call time on us. So Don, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, students. Thank you, friends. We'll make this Zoom recording available and put it out there for everyone. And then Don and Kofi and Andre and some of the rest of you, I have some ideas for how to follow up with this in terms of making archival projects, including I'd really love, there's a grant out there for students to make a documentary, and I think this would be a great, I fell into my email box this morning and I thought, yeah, that's it. So I would like to bring in some of my colleagues from Fine Arts and Communications, and maybe we can make all kinds of projects around this to make the history, make it living history and give it legs. But you really gave it a huge push today, Don, and that was huge. And if Mary Hoover comes to any of you at 3 o'clock in the morning, tell her I sent you. Because I know she's still going to come back around. And she comes from that same era as Jean Thomas. I feel like her energy, from what I can tell, her energy and Jean Thomas's energy were the same energy.
Yes.
Right? That's one of the things I was feeling in that photograph.
Yes.
I was feeling that intensity that generation, you're included, by the way, because you're pretty good at looking somebody in the eye too, Don Dorsey. So some of that intensity can be very useful to us now in our current after times. All right. So I'm going to push the stop record button. I am going to wave goodbye.